Anthony Treash, Pro Football Focus, joins us. Anthony, what's going on, my friend? How are you?
Doing pretty good. How are you doing?
I am doing well, man. Appreciate you asking. The fun is in the winning, of course, and I'm glad that we sit here on this Wednesday talking about a big Gamecocks victory. Now, Anthony, you alluded to it, right? You felt like South Carolina was capable of doing what they were doing or what they did on Saturday, but we just hadn't seen it in so long, right? From a South Carolina team going on the road, playing the way they did, and really dominating Kentucky up front, which is something that the Cats have done to South Carolina, it feels like, over the last 8 years. I'll give you the floor. Just talk about the game as a whole, South Carolina's performance going on the road at night in a hostile environment, whether it be with Will Levis or no Will Levis, but the job that South Carolina did to get a top 15 victory over the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that they needed, right? I mean, now they're on a 3-game winning streak. Things are looking a lot better than they did when they were 1-2, and kind of had some disappointing performances against some of these, higher levels of competition with Arkansas and Georgia, and then Kentucky, like you said. I mean, they just outmuscled them in the trenches a little bit. I thought from Kentucky's offensive line, obviously, it's not up to their program standards. Definitely not one of the best in the SEC, but I mean, South Carolina made them look really, really bad. And I think that kind of speaks volumes about kind of where South Carolina is getting better at defensively, and also just the state of Kentucky's offensive line. So I think that was kind of the big takeaway. And if I had to give out kind of, my gold star for the game, would be to that pass rush, right? Because they were all over in the passing game, and getting there with multiple sacks, a lot of key sacks on first down too, just made it really difficult for Kentucky's offense to get anything rolling there. Even the run game, I mean, Chris Rodriguez was Chris Rodriguez. He was a bowling ball, right? I mean, he's a difficult one to get down. I would say he's probably, the biggest Mack truck in college football at the running back position. And he showed that in this game. But again, it could only get him so far, right? Because there were some stuffs in there as well. So, that was kind of my big takeaway, along with still a lot of issues on offense that need to get figured out. They had some key moments in there as well. I mean, the start of the game was a little bit, I wouldn't say fluky, but I mean, it definitely went in South Carolina's favor. Not something you can count on in every single game from happening with turnover and kind of scoring off that right away. But overall, I mean, this was something you needed to see from the defense, whether it was against a backup or not. And the offense still got a lot of room to grow. I mean, there's still some things I need to see from them, a lot to prove, in my opinion.
Yeah, Anthony, I want to get to that pass rush. You talk about the defensive line, and a lot of guys were active on Saturday night. Zach Pickens, Jordan Birch, Tonka Hemingway had 2 fumble recoveries. And we talked a lot about the numbers going in that Kentucky game, that South Carolina had one of the highest, or I think the highest blitz rate in college football, and only had 4 sacks coming in the game. They literally eclipsed their season total in that one individual game against Kentucky. What did the numbers say about just how good that Gamecocks pass rush was on Saturday night?
Yeah, and the thing was, like, a lot of the sacks, it was a 4-man rush, right? I mean, and what you said right off the top caught my attention, because it was the same thing I was thinking. A lot of guys were involved, right? I don't think there was a singular player that just was the game wrecker. He was the key piece. He was the reason why everything was so successful. I mean, it was the pass rush as a whole. And it really was the plays that they weren't really sending, more guys than normal, that were the most successful there. I think, what was it, 5 sacks when they were sending 4. And just looking at it, I mean, it was one guy after another, just flat out beating his guy, and getting after the quarterback there. So, I mean, I thought it was a kind of a collective effort as a whole. And I do think with this team, with the high blitz rates, I still think they could probably take some off a little bit, because I think it's still a very aggressive, and I honestly don't think they need to be that as aggressive as they are, because then it leaves them vulnerable in coverage in certain areas. So I think that is something that I did take away as well. And I'm going to be curious to see how they kind of go about that as the season progresses. But the next thing that they will have against Texas A&M probably won't be as easy for them, because, I mean, that offensive line is night and day from what it is in Kentucky. But, different quarterback situation, which I'm sure we'll talk a lot about later on and next week possibly. So, I think that was just kind of the big thing, is that they didn't need to bring all this heat to really get out to the quarterback. That defensive line, those 4-man rushes, I mean, they were winning. They were winning at a high rate.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you can affect a quarterback with just 4 down linemen, like you mentioned, just the 4-man rush, it is a game changer. And I thought you mentioned that first play, Anthony, it's so funny. I don't think it's unfair for you to say Maybe fluky is too strong of a word, but I will say after that first play, and it might sound kind of no dub because the Gamecocks literally recover a fumble and they score on one play, but it more so represented to me the mentality of the game. Like I felt like Kentucky was a team that under Mark Stoops beating the Gamecocks the way they had, they prided themselves on no nonsense, ground and pound, punch USC in the face and dominate up front. And it just made me feel like I was like, if Kentucky feels like they've got to be that gimmicky and they've got to be that finesse tonight, I was confident from the jump. I was like, if South Carolina's offense can move the ball at all, I think Kentucky just showed you that they have practically no confidence on the offensive side.
Exactly. I mean, you could quite see that, and like I said before entering the game, Will Levis, I don't think he's kind of been, this elite all-star quarterback that everyone's been pegging him out to be. But I do think that he was doing exactly everything as was designed, and I think they were nervous because they weren't going to have somebody that could be like, okay, we can count on him to at least make this throw. May not be the most difficult throw in the book, but he can actually make it consistently. They didn't have that. I think kind of losing that backbone made them nervous, and that's when you can kind of get gimmicky, and it can kind of backfire on you pretty quickly. And honestly, when you have some of those guys that don't see the field often leading the offense, I don't know if we really want to go down that route because it kind of leaves them to disaster being a higher chance of actually coming out and playing through in the game. So it was interesting to kind of see that. And with South Carolina's offense, I don't know if they consistently moved the ball. I think they were pretty inefficient overall, but still they had like 3 or 4 just very key plays that really set everything up for them. Of course, the Juice Wells screen, that final scoring drive, they had multiple or a key run from Marshawn Lloyd, and then the trick there for the touchdown. So I think they just kind of had those key moments in there when they really needed them. But I thought it was pretty inefficient for them overall, but yeah, I mean, going back to what you said from Kentucky's perspective, you could definitely see that not having that backbone, that safe, okay, we can at least get what we want, carried out through the field. The game script's going to get carried out. Things not going to be broken. They didn't have that, and you could see that it made them nervous. I mean, obviously from the jump with them.
Now let's move to the offensive side. Anthony, talk Spencer Rattler, 14 and 19 on the night, 177 yards, a touchdown and a pick. His best QBR of the season, by the way, 85.7. The second half, obviously, this offense really came on. You scored just a 7 in the first half, and it was with basically like a 5-yard field. But Rattler in the second half, 8 for 10, led 3 70-plus yard scoring drives. Just talk about what you saw from him, what the numbers say, and was there anything that stood out to you from the first half to the second half that he did differently, the offense did differently, what you took away from Saturday night?
I mean, honestly, it's still the same takeaway, just broadly speaking. I just still don't see a lot of trust there. And I think from an offensive design perspective, I mean, a lot of it, we're getting a lot of safe, conservative throws, just quick, short, get the ball out quickly. And, Spencer's carrying those out, right? I mean, he's hitting them quickly. I mean, he's got, one of the highest completion percentages on throws within 2.5 seconds from the snap. So, I mean, kind of those quick scheme design throws to kind of get your playmakers in space. He's hitting them, and it's great. And, we saw, like with Juice Wells, that touchdown, it can work sometimes, but you can't live and die that way. And I still think that there's still just the ecosystem as a whole isn't great. And I think Spencer's still making some bad decisions with the football. And I think when you get that paired together, it's obviously you can lead to inefficiency. And I think something that stood out to me, because I was watching him, catching up again, just kind of reviewing. And I mean, the dude's not playing in rhythm a lot. And I went and looked, and he has the second most dropbacks not in rhythm in the entire Power 5. In rhythm, he's like 50-something. So, I mean, it's a pretty drastic difference there when you're not playing in rhythm, it leads to kind of mixed results. And, we still see some holding on to the football, some hesitancy, firing into smaller windows late, and that can lead to plays on the ball for the defense. That's just still kind of my takeaway there. So overall, kind of with this game script, you just didn't really see a whole lot of faith there. And you kind of saw some of those moments. We saw, the moments that, when Seven had the opportunity to throw the ball downfield, just wasn't really getting it out, quickly, right? I mean, he had some nice throws on the move, but just overall, if he does kind of have those downfield concepts, it's still holding onto the football a little bit. But I think it's kind of pulling from both parts. I'm not going to say it's one or the other. It's the play calling. It's seven. I think it's both. And it all goes back to my theme is that I'm not sure that the trust is there. And I think that they're still trying to run the offense that was there last year and kind of work for them a little bit. And that's not really Seven's game at all whatsoever. And, when he is kind of in under pressure, again, it's still going back to what I've been saying, that issue he's been working on. He's not throwing on the move. He's just kind of hanging in there. He keeps stepping back, drops getting longer. It just makes everything much more difficult. So, I think you never want to kind of rebuild everything. You can never do that in season, right? But I think there's room to kind of self-evaluate, especially at this moment in time, halfway through the season, kind of getting that bye. So I think that's still kind of my big takeaway. We just really didn't see anything drastically different that I wanted to see from the overall offense's output from a passing perspective, play calling perspective, but also just a performance from Spencer Rattler.
So when you say in rhythm, Anthony, you're talking like a clean pocket, like not on the run, or anything. I'm assuming that's what you mean, correct?
Yeah, when you're in rhythm, so think of it as, okay, quarterback drops and within 2 hitches he's throwing the ball, right? So we're not seeing him, and some of that is his play style, right? Because with the way he plays, holding on the football, right? He's kind of bouncing around a little bit. He kind of forces it sometimes, but a lot of that is to the offense. And that also includes all the screens too, because you're kind of firing out the ball quickly. You're not having a drop there. Those now throws, so that's kind of the definition of in rhythm passing. You see a quarterback, he's got a 5-step drop, less than 2 hitches, balls out. That's an in rhythm drop back. We're just not seeing a lot of that. And I think it's both parties. And I think too, you could also look at the offensive line that also plays into a part of it from a pressure perspective. You can see it with coverages as well. It all kind of goes together hand in hand. Sometimes in some cases, you can point to one issue being the reason why. It's the quarterbacks, the offensive line, it's the play calling. I think in this case, it's a little bit of everything. So yeah, I think it is a very telling area of quarterback play, in my opinion. And I think with Spencer Rattler, it explains a lot with the way everything is for South Carolina this year.
Yeah, Anthony, you mentioned again, the win was great, right? We're all excited. We're dancing on Big Blue Nation's grave this week. It's a good time. It's a lot of fun. But when you look at it critically, there's still a lot left to be desired from the offensive side. And I would ask you this question, Anthony, because again, one of the reasons that I really value your opinion and I like getting national guys on that don't really have a dog in the fight, right? They don't have a bias, so they're able to see things maybe a little bit clearly than others. When you look at this offense, though, I just feel like the common theme that we hear from, the rumblings behind closed doors, even though like announcers on SEC Network, they talk about how complex the offense is and how difficult it is to understand. We literally had a Dante Reno, I'll name drop. He went on a show, I was told yesterday or last night, and talked about how Spencer Rattler told him that the offense is complicated and it's tough to learn. If guys are still saying that halfway through the season, Anthony, like I understand saying that in fall camp, maybe even week 1, but like, how can guys still be saying that 6 games through? And I don't want to, I don't want to run with this. This is it. This is the problem. But it just feels like this comes up time and time and time again. When you watch the Gamecocks, does it feel like to you they're doing too much? Or does it feel like that, like they're overthinking it? They're trying to reinvent the wheel offensively?
I think that's a good way to put it. I think that you can see sometimes they are overthinking it. And I think with what they're doing, there's a lot involved to it. And I think the fact that we are hearing that right now kind of raises red flags. And 2, Spencer Rattler's a transfer, right? This is his first year in the system. He's been around, he's played at the collegiate level, but it's a little different from, an inexperienced freshman coming in. Because it's a completely different thing. And if you look nationwide, a lot of the transfer quarterbacks that went to a completely different system, they're not playing the best, right? I'm not talking Caleb Williams. He obviously knows Lincoln Riley's offense. Dylan Gabriel at Oklahoma before his injury, he was obviously new Jeff Levy's offense like the back of his hand. But, you look at some of these other guys like a Spencer Rattler, we're seeing some of these guys struggle in new offenses. And when it's a little bit added, it's a little bit more complex. It's going to make things significantly more difficult when you're that transfer. So I think that is kind of the big theme there. Like you said, kind of just overthinking a little bit. And that's where I kind of go back to the trust, because they're not really letting Spencer kind of play his game. I think they're forcing him to play a different game. And maybe it's not a lack of trust. Maybe it's just, hey, we want to play this way and you're going to live by that. Again, I just think it's very, very difficult to do. And I think if you look long term, I think now you can start talking, okay, he's probably going to come back to school. You'd have to at this point. What's going to change? What do you expect for next season? Is the offense going to change? I think you never want to look too far ahead, but I think that's kind of what comes to my mind right now, because right now, whatever they're doing, it's not working at all whatsoever. Changes are going to have to be made, and I don't want to call for anybody's jobs. I never want to do that. But something's going to have to change, whether, it's the way they're kind of, design some stuff, some of the plays they install, concepts. I mean, or it's just a completely new person calling plays in general. So, I think that could be, fully understandable why some of these players are struggling. And when you get these guys, and I said it before this season, I was telling everybody this. I said, I think it's the year of the unknown that's going to capture a lot of people's attentions internally, just nationwide. They're going to be focusing on these schools that just went super transfer heavy. How does it work? How is everything gelling? How can they adjust to this new system? And I think South Carolina is going to be a case study for a lot of teams, saying, okay, they had a lot of transfers, didn't know the system. Now they're kind of getting up to speed with it, and it's not quite working yet. Maybe they can change some stuff around, but you never want to hear, yeah, it is very complex midway through the season. Even with learning a new system within the first year, I mean, that kind of raises some alarms. And like we talked about a few weeks ago, when they're calling plays that they haven't even practiced in a few weeks, I think that kind of goes into it as well. Maybe they're not, it's just kind of the rash decision-making on game day from a play calling perspective, that not everybody's kind of on the same page there. So it's definitely interesting. And I want to do some more research on it too, in terms of just kind of the transfer impact with learning these new systems, because I think it's, like I said, I think it's going to be a very important piece to kind of the transfer portal puzzle. So I definitely think, kind of like what you said, overthinking a little bit. I think that could probably be the big piece to it.
Anthony, I was going to say, leave the job calling to me. I promise I will. I'll take care of it. So that's another conversation for another time. On that note, though, Anthony, you bring up a great point, and this will be more of a talking point, I think, after the season. But it's a great time right now as we go into the bye week and we're halfway through to reflect. And you talk about Spencer Rattler, and I think, right now, I think you would say he's going to come back. I mean, I don't think the numbers support. I mean, even with all the talent he has, and I'm sure Spencer Rattler's a guy that would go to the combine and dazzle, right? But the numbers just don't really support him, making that jump. But I think it's pivotal, man. And I talked about this over the summer. I think it's pivotal for South Carolina to get the most out of Rattler and to elevate his game, because don't you feel like, let's say he comes back next year, and let's say for whatever reason it doesn't work out again, his numbers are very pedestrian. I just feel like it's going to be a knock against this football program in regards to how you developed a guy like this. Because you mentioned this is sort of a case study. If he doesn't ball out and do well, I mean, what are people going to think? What are people going to say in regards to you're trying to lure in top elite quarterback talent? If I'm a five-star guy, I'm going to say, well, look what they did with Spencer Rattler. It's not like they exactly elevated his game and boosted his draft stock. And so I think, to your point again, and I'm not writing anything off. We're just 6 games through. There's a lot of football to be played and changes could be made and all that good stuff. I'm not saying it's, doom and gloom or that they're doomed in the future, but I think it's pivotal they get the most out of him, man, because I think you're not just for your transfer portal guys, but again, when you're recruiting these top freshmen, I said that the big win in getting Spencer Rattler wasn't that you're going to win 10 games this year, but it's the fact that you're changing the narrative around the quarterback position at South Carolina. We're talking about a program that has not had a quarterback drafted since the draft in April of 1990, right? And that's the most important position on the field. So I think you'd probably agree, man. It's just the first half of the season is what it is, but it's pivotal they get this thing figured out, and at minimum get Spencer Rattler to a point where, he's once again highly regarded as a top NFL draft prospect.
I think absolutely, if they don't get the most out of him, it's a knock. Again, you look at 2020 and 2021. I mean, Spencer Rattler was the highest graded quarterback in our database. I've talked about it before. He was a preseason Heisman favorite, number 1 overall pick favorite after his first year. He didn't forget how to play football. That was not all a fluke, right? And if these numbers that he's posting right now, which are pretty poor, I mean, his PFF grade right now is nearly 30 points lower than what it was last year when a lot of people were saying he was one of the worst quarterbacks in college football, which was hyperbole. But right now, I mean, it's not great. Objectively, he's not performing up to expectation. And I think if he kind of sustains this level of play he's at right now throughout the rest of his career at South Carolina, I think absolutely it could be, a knock where some people kind of step back and say, is this where I would want to go? Right. I'm a top tier talent. Look what they did here. I don't know if I'm confident in that they can kind of maximize, their own abilities. So I definitely think I don't want to say like it's got a bunch of pressure. It's, he's the make or break player that's going to define the success of South Carolina for the next, couple of decades. But I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if he continues on this path and, he doesn't go to the draft, comes back next year, it's the same story. The next thing you know, he's done playing football after being, a Heisman favorite, number 1 overall pick favorite. I mean, there's going to be a lot of questions there. And, again, it's not, obviously you can put some blame on Seven, but again, the talent's obviously there. Everybody knows the type of talent that he can be. And we've seen him do it before. That's the biggest thing. This isn't a former 5-star recruit that's never played well at the collegiate level. We see those often. I mean, quite often. You look at some of the top 3 quarterbacks in every single recruiting class, usually 1 or 2 of them, they falter and they never live up to expectations. They never even show signs of them being a capable college quarterback. But we've seen that from Spencer Rattler multiple occasions. He took Oklahoma to a Big 12 championship, his first year starting for the program. So, we definitely know it's in him. And I think if he can't even come back to sniffing that level, I think it could be something where, a lot of people are asking, can South Carolina kind of take that next step forward, right? Can they actually develop these guys? And I think if you look too at some of the other 5-star talents that have walked through there recently, we haven't seen them kind of reach that type of level, and that doesn't help the cause at all whatsoever. So, I think it's definitely an interesting situation. Again, I've been a believer in Spencer Rattler. I still respect the hell out of his talent. Right now, he's far below my expectations for him. Because I thought he could still be a star quarterback for him. I still think he can be, but I mean, there's going to have to be a lot of change for him to get there, I think.
Anthony, let's move into Beamer Ball. 5 blocked punts thus far this season. What do the numbers say about how good South Carolina has been on special teams with yet another blocked punt in that game against Kentucky?
Yeah, one of the highest graded special teams units. I think they're top 15 in special teams grade right now, just like they were last year. I mean, they're top 3. We talked about it a few weeks ago. And again, I think that does kind of speak on coaching. I think with special teams, obviously, pure athletic ability goes into it a ton, but that's coaching more than anything. And I think anybody at any level of football will recognize that. I think coaching matters really in college football more than anywhere. But I think specifically on special teams, that's where it really, really matters. And that's where it really shows. It shows very well in South Carolina's case. So, I mean, it's definitely something that's, I'm not going to say it's been a complete disappointment of the year for South Carolina. I think if, you said to me preseason, you said to everybody in the preseason, hey, they're going to be 4-2 halfway through the year with lost starts on Georgia, you'd probably expect that's a pretty good year. I'd take it any day of the week, right? So it's not, the sky's not falling yet, but I think overall that's kind of been the key takeaway. The special teams unit is still performing up to expectation, right? And again, more than anywhere, that comes from coaching. And so that's something to be encouraged about. And I think too, you look at that, you still look at the recruiting front, you look at the morale more than anything. And you see, okay, the faith is still there long-term, with what Beamer's doing at this program.
On that note of Shane Beamer, Anthony, I'd just love to get your thoughts on. I'm sure you kept up with it over the preseason, kind of the back and forth between Stoops and Beamer and the South Carolina program and the culture versus climate thing. As an outsider, again, just sort of your thoughts on the post game antics from Shane Beamer with the sunglasses and the culture over climate T-shirts. And it's funny, man. I was posting some of those quotes from over the summer at SEC Media Days from Stoops, and I had people telling me, Gamecock fans, oh, just let it go. It's no big deal. Stoops already made a statement, and, I don't think Shane really cares. Yeah, he took that shit pretty personally. So your thoughts on just, I mean, it was one of it's just, the fun side of college football, right? So many times it's all coach speak, and these guys don't let their personalities show, and that was just pure excitement and enjoyment and adrenaline, I would say, for all parties involved Saturday night after that W.
Man, I loved it, and I think I get the whole coach speak stuff. I get, you don't want to talk openly to, the public eye. You kind of want to keep things internal and all that. But you can still do that while showing off some flair and some personality, showing who you are, and having fun with it. And Shane Beamer's doing that. We saw it this past weekend with the video. I mean, I was getting on a plane and I just pulled up Twitter and I was looking at it and I saw that video pop up. I'm just sitting there laughing while I'm getting ready to scan my ticket. What Shane Beamer's doing, so that made my night. I love it. We talk a lot about Kentucky actually here because there's a big argument at PFF headquarters whether they're a football or a basketball school. Different sides on that. Being in Cincinnati, a lot of Kentucky faithful here. Not me. I don't have a side really anywhere, but I thought it was a lot of fun. And again, I think from a recruiting perspective, you look at that, you're like, I want to go play for that guy. And I mean, he's having fun. He's enjoying it, and while still making sure his players are up to speed and making sure everything's straightforward, and still kind of having that, I would say he's a mix of the old coaching mind and the new mind. He knows how to do it the right way in this day and age. So I loved it. I think in that moment, hell, I do the same thing. I mean, you got to kind of address it at some point. But yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Anthony, before we get you out of here, it's crazy, man, how winning one game can just change the complete outlook and perspective of your season. It's why we talked about it being the greatest inflection point of the season. This time last week, I had folks saying, Chris, we'll be lucky to go 5-7. It's, the season's down the tube, and you go on the road and you beat the Cats, and all of a sudden I got the same people telling me, man, we could start 7-2. But the reality is this: when you look at the second half of the schedule, and now we're hearing these rumblings about Texas A&M, and they might be on QB3 coming in the game next weekend. And you start looking down the schedule of Mizzou and Vandy and Florida and games that you feel like are very gettable. Tennessee will be tough. Obviously, I think they're at minimum the third best team in the SEC, and then Clemson on the road. But this season is setting up, I think, to kind of be what we all thought it was probably always going to be, around a 7-5-ish. I mean, if you could hit 8-4, that would be an incredible finish. But, with that win against Kentucky now, and you've won 3 straight, whether it's perfect or not, this is going to be a football team that's playing with a lot of confidence, a lot of momentum. And then again, you hear the A&M news this morning with the quarterback situation. And Anthony, I tell you, man, it kind of feels like the stars are aligning for a big run here for Carolina football.
For sure. And I think let's say everything stays as it is, the offense is still the way it is, 7-5 is still on the table, right? I think it's a pretty favorable stretch there. I mean, like you said, Texas A&M, I mean, their quarterback situation is, pretty bad at this point. I mean, I know they're going to have their QB3 is a 5-star, but he's a true freshman. We don't know how he's going to perform. I would probably say more, the reason they were in that Bama game was just quarterback struggles for Bama. Jalen Milroe, he looked bad. I mean, he had 5 turnover-worthy plays for the game, 0 big-time throws. I mean, I think that played more into it, not having Bryce Young than anything, than Texas A&M just kind of being the better team. But, I think that's a game that's interesting that could go in South Carolina's favor. And then in the preseason, Florida looked like it was going to be a tough one. I think it's probably a little bit less than that. Not to say it's going to be difficult for him, but Anthony Richardson, he hasn't performed to expectation. I mean, it's still the same story, just a lot of inaccurate throws, bad decisions. Basically what we saw last year, just a raw product that still has a lot of room for development. And again, 2 other winnable games there with Vandy and Missouri. And you never want to look too far ahead and start just counting up wins and losses. But it's definitely a good stretch, even though they have some tough games to close out the year, where they could get to that 7-5 point. I think if you want to get to that 8-4 point, or even better, you're going to have to see completely different play from 7. And really the offense as a whole. It's going to have to be kind of what I was expecting, which is, Spencer Rattler's, you see the talent, you see those special throws consistently, kind of back to what he was. You're going to have to see that play kind of reform to kind of get to that level. But again, if nothing changes, I mean, you definitely could see a scenario where South Carolina's 7-5. I mean, they definitely have. I just think from a talent perspective, you look at the teams that they have on the rest of their schedule, with kind of looking at Mizzou and Vandy. I mean, they can definitely beat them just with the talent that they have right now, particularly on defense. So, I think they're at a good spot at the halfway point, despite, the way the offense is. If you told me the offense was going to be like this before the season, I don't know if they would have been 4-2 in my prediction. So, I think everything's good, all things considered, still a lot of room to improve. So I think that's where the encouragement lies. They're in a good spot right now with the room to even get to the next level, significantly so.
Anthony, you make such a great point, man, because I think about it too. And I posted the numbers for Spencer Rattler in the first half of the season because next Monday I'll do my full mid-season report card show and kind of look back at the first half. And I mean, you look at Spencer Rattler's numbers, and if you would have told me the Gamecocks were 4-2, just to go through these, Anthony, I know you probably already know these, but 66% completion percentage, 1,298 yards, 5 TDs, 8 interceptions. I mean, if you would have told me Carolina was 4-2 with those numbers, I probably would have said you were crazy, but you still somehow found a way. So like you mentioned, man, if they can maybe take the second half, what they did in Lexington, and sort of bottle that up and improve on that moving forward, I mean, the sky's the limit, I think, for this football team, but we got to see it happen, obviously. Anthony Treash, Pro Football Focus. Anthony, last thing before I get you out of here, obviously the Gamecocks do not play this weekend, but there is a big weekend of SEC football. Ole Miss, Auburn, Tennessee, Bama is obviously the big one. Arkansas, really interesting matchup at BYU. Florida, LSU, Mississippi State, Kentucky, and then Georgia and Vandy. What stands out to you on the slate this weekend, the Week 7 slate, I should say? And obviously, I know you're probably going to talk a lot about that Alabama-Tennessee game. That is the one we all want to see. And I think it's going to give us a really good idea. Everybody's been clamoring who's the third best team in the SEC. Tennessee's got a great shot, even if they don't win, to make a statement on Saturday.
100%. I mean, that's the game of the weekend, right? I mean, it's crazy to think that if Tennessee pulls off the upset, they're going to be the number 1 team in college football for Week 8. I mean, nobody thought that would have happened. And I think you got to give credit to Coach Heupel. I think his scheme is probably one of the best in college football. It's definitely very quarterback friendly for Hendon Hooker, but he's carrying it out. He's taking good care of the football. That's the biggest thing. In this offense, just don't make stupid decisions. And he's not doing that, right? I mean, it's very play-action centric. I mean, one of the few teams that are over 50% with play-action passes. Like 11.5 yards per attempt on those concepts. I mean, it's pretty simple. Single high defense. Okay, we're going to the go ball down the sideline. If not, we're going to get creative there and use that up-tempo attack. Hit this quick slant over the middle, get your playmakers in space. I mean, it's just an awesome offense for him. And, I think, too, Jalen Hyatt, they don't have Cedric Tillman, but Jalen Hyatt, I mean, he's an awesome player, in my opinion. Elite speed that's very dangerous. So I think we could see an interesting game, especially with Bryce Young. Is he healthy? Is the throwing shoulder good? Because if it's not, I mean, I would probably pick Tennessee to win. So I think that's the biggest piece of the puzzle. And if he has no limitations, I'm going to pick Bama, and I think they're probably going to win comfortably. So I think that's the biggest piece of the puzzle. That's how good Bryce Young is, for one. So I think it's just kind of up in the air with Bryce Young. That's going to kind of decide the matchup there. But nonetheless, very exciting matchup. I mean, got a ton of other ones. Like you said, Arkansas, BYU coming off a bad game against Notre Dame. Jaron Hall, by far his worst game of his career. Just really couldn't do anything that they wanted it to do offensively. And I think it's just going to continue to be more difficult for him with Arkansas because this is a physical team. This is a very physical team, as physical as Notre Dame. So I think that's going to be the big piece of the puzzle too. Even outside of the SEC, you got Michigan, Penn State. I think that could be, sneakily the best game of the weekend, aside from, and maybe not sneakily, but aside from Alabama, Tennessee. J.J. McCarthy, I think he's a star, top 5 quarterback in college football. Just a lot of good football that is going to be played. You got USC, Utah on the West Coast. I mean, we were talking about it in here at the office. It's looking like one of the best slates of the weekend, so I'm pumped for it.
Yeah, Anthony, I think I read something yesterday. The most ranked matchups in a slate of college football since 2017. So we've got a really fun weekend of ball. Again, even though the Gamecocks are not playing, I'm sure everybody tuning into this will be glued to their TVs watching all the action unfold. Anthony Treash of Pro Football Focus joins us every single Wednesday. Be sure to check out his work on social media and at profootballfocus.com. Anthony, appreciate you taking the time, man, and we'll do it again next week.
Yeah, appreciate you. Talk to you soon.
Absolutely, man. Take care.